Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn and I am so glad you found me. If you're not new here, this is not new hair, but if you are new here, this is not new hair. If you're not new here, this is new hair. So I was like, maybe I should do a jump scare, but anyways, surprise, it's me. We are entering our Do Blondes Have More Fun era. I actually got pulled over for speeding today. Anyways, it's a long story. Maybe I'll share it on my Instagram or something. I really didn't think I was. That's fine. I didn't argue it. I was like, yes, absolutely, sir. But I was like, oh, well, like maybe we'll test it out. I got the ticket. So far, I don't know. I think I have to go blonde or something. All right. Anyways, we do not have a moment to waste. Today's case, there is a lot to go through. So we are going to get started. Let's just start with our little grounding, set up, situated riddle. Okay. Today's riddle is, I have 4 fingers and a thumb, but I will never be alive. What am I? All right. Today's case is one that I had heard about, but it wasn't one that I was overly familiar with. I knew the name. I knew like a very brief synopsis, had no idea what I was getting into when one of my good friends, Shayla, had sent me this ransom photo and explained that it was sent to the family when the victim had already been gone and her eyes had been sewn open. That did happen, but there was so much of a whirlwind to this case. It's absolutely unbelievable. So just hang on. I first want to give a huge shout out to Victoria Evans, who's she has so much content on this person. She, I think, was able to purchase files, so that helped heaps with researching, getting all of my questions answered. Go and check her stuff out because she does do updated videos still. She shares a lot of like photos and surveillance footage and stuff, and she does that quite regularly. I think she actually just uploaded one like a couple days ago. So if that interests you, go and check her out. I also want to give a hello and shout out to my girl Danielle Helen, who also did an outstanding video on this case too. I know sometimes I used to overthink and be like, oh, this case is out there, but I think that's like the thing about true crime. Sometimes if you see a case, you'll just keep rewatching it because you want to get like different insights and different people's takes. Like I think we generally obviously take the same thing because it's true crime. The case is what it is. But like digging into different things, different opinions, all that stuff. So if you do want to go and watch Danielle's too, she did one a couple of years ago and it's great. So as you know by the thumbnail, we are talking about serial killer Israel Keyes. He's, I don't know, I guess known as like the smartest serial killer, the most meticulous serial killer of the 21st century, also the traveling serial killer. He was also a bank robber, a necrophiliac, and an arsonist, and a lot more. So there's that. That's what we're getting into. Now, one of the most unsettling things about him is that he didn't really have an MO. And so his actual number of victims is extremely controversial. And we will touch on that as we're going through, and I'll let you know like which ones are. Let's just, I guess, try to make this just like as easy to follow as possible and just go from the beginning because there's, like I said, so much. Israel Human Waste Keyes. That's what I think his middle name is. He was born on January 7th, 1979 in Cove, Utah, to his parents, John Jeffrey Keyes, and his mother, Heidi Hackinson. He was a part of a very big family. He, I believe, was the second of 10 children. Before he was born, his parents had lived in Los Angeles, and then as a young couple they moved to Utah to start their family. They were Mormon at the time, but we're gonna get into how their beliefs they have changed quite a bit, which I believe can also like kind of do a number on your psyche, especially to the extremes that they were. Not in any way, like I'm not lining up like any form of excuse right here. I'm just saying like at this period right now, they were Mormon. They were also not fans of the government or any authority figure. His parents did not believe in hospitals or medication. So all of the kids were born at home and they had no social security number, no birth certificate. They didn't attend school. They did try to have, I don't know, this whole kind of like raising family thing in Utah where they had like neighbors and stuff like that. The neighbors said they were a little bit out there. Didn't they see anything like too alarming? There were a few neighbors who said they didn't see the kids often, but knew there were kids and were concerned enough to call in, kind of like a wellness check, which they did not like. So they moved to Covell, Washington. I believe Cove, Washington. And they bought 160 acres of land on top of a mountain. And then they rented out this 1-bedroom cabin that had no heat, no water, no electricity. And they did this so that nobody could really bother them out there. When they did this move, they also switched up their religion. They became fundamentalist Christian, and they lived out there for about 7 years, just eating off the, or I guess living off the land. And so at a really young age, Israel had learned how to plant his own food, hunt, skin animals, butcher, prepare meat. I don't think that that's like the worst skill to have. It sounds like they were pretty sheltered though. They wore, like, all of the kids had worn hand-me-downs that didn't always fit. Allegedly, Israel's toes were deformed because the shoes that he wore, they were just like way too small. As he was growing up, he was still wearing the same shoes. The kids also took on a lot of responsibilities. Their father was building their own cabin, which took quite a long time. And as Israel got older, he also helped his dad to build their home. And it sounds like he also had a lot of responsibilities within the home. He often took care of his sisters. He learned how to sew, how to cook for the family. He even learned how to braid his sister's hair. And most of the interactions that they had, like in terms of playing and stuff, were just like within their house with siblings. But there were times that their parents would get together with other homeschooled families to try and socialize them. Some of those kids' memories of Israel at that time were nothing really alarming. They said that he was really funny. And then when he was 12 years old, his family started attending another new church. This was called the Ark. And so then they started hanging out with that group of people. The Ark is described as like a military-based white supremacist church. They basically taught that white people were the superior race and the Bible is like their story. This is also the same church that the Kehoe family attended. So Chevy Kehoe had murdered, at this point he was a kid, but grew up to murder an entire family. They were the Miller family. Ended up dumping their bodies in a swamp. And then a year after that, he and his brother Shane, got into a big shootout with police in Ohio. They were ultimately arrested. Chevy had received 3 consecutive life sentences for the murder of the Miller family, and Shane received 24 years for the shootout with police. So these were the types of friends that Israel had made in this group. And what he really liked about the Kehoe brothers was that they were really into guns, and he had an obsession with guns since he was like 6 years old. I guess before meeting them, he had access to guns, but it was usually from breaking into people's houses. He would steal them from people's homes. Sometimes he would keep them. Sometimes he would sell them. Sometimes his sister even went along with him, and allegedly they would shoot like BB guns at the house, and then if nobody came out, they assumed no one was in there, and then they would go in and break into the house. Apparently there were times they wouldn't even really take anything. It was just kind of like for the thrill of it. They would like move furniture around and then leave and hide so that they could see when the owners came back and watch them freak out. I guess she tapered off from this as she matured, but his rebellion just kind of intensified and his stalking intensified. He would camouflage himself and like sit up in trees and just watch people for hours. And then eventually he moved on to killing. It started with animals. When he was 14, he admitted to killing his sister's cat. He had said that this cat was always getting in the garbage and said, like, if this cat gets in the trash again, I'm gonna kill it. Sure enough, he took this cat out into the woods, but he wasn't alone. He was with another one of his sisters and a friend of his, and then that friend brought his sister. And I don't know if they knew that something was gonna happen, but he took a piece of parachute cord, he tied it to the tree, and he shot this poor animal in its stomach with a .22 revolver. And I guess it didn't instantly kill the animal. So it like ran around the tree, crashed into it, and then it started like vomiting. I'm sorry, that is so graphic and upsetting. And his recollection of this was that when it was happening, he kind of laughed, and he was laughing at like the way that it looked as it was running around the tree. And then he looks around and realizes that no one else is laughing, and the kid that's his age was actually also throwing up and really traumatized. And that kid went on to tell his dad, and then obviously his dad told Israel's parents, and then he said that was pretty much it. And then that was the last time that anybody wanted to go in the woods with him again. So he took this as a lesson that he couldn't hang out with that guy, and realized that he wasn't like quote unquote normal. I guess that wasn't the only time that he did something like that in front of others, so I don't know if this had happened before or after, but there was another incident where kids said that they were with Israel and he shot a deer this time, and it actually didn't fully kill the deer. And instead of, you know, doing what hunters would do, like, I guess, you know, humane thing to, you know, shoot again and make sure that it was dead, he decided to gut the deer while it was still alive. And it was just like these sick, demented, twisted cases like this over and over, and they just intensified. In 1999, Israel was 16, and he was arrested for the first time. He was caught shoplifting, and he was just given community service, and that was pretty much it. After that, he had worked really hard to just completely stay off the grid. And also around this time is when now his parents decided that they wanted to give being Amish a go. They sold their house, all their things, and then moved once again. And this is where a lot of people believe the story moves on to, you know, from acts doing horrendous things to animals to humans. When Israel was 17 years old, a 12-year-old girl named Julie Harris went missing on March 3rd, 1996. Julie was described as a very funny girl, somebody who loved to play, you know, fun, innocent, wholesome pranks. Seeing her picture just like melted my heart. I thought she was so adorable. She literally looks like a human Cabbage Patch, not the baby, but you know, like the toddler with like the long hair, like just so precious. She was also a double amputee. She had prosthetic feet and braces, and because of this, she got really into the Special Olympics. She even won gold medal in downhill skiing. And on the morning that she disappeared, she was supposed to go to church, but her mom finds out that she never made it. And as soon as she found this out, she immediately knew that something awful had happened. She quickly went to the police, organized searches. She plastered flyers everywhere, but there weren't any leads right away. It wasn't until a few weeks after she disappeared that her prosthetics and her little purse were found near the Colville River. At this time, her remains had not been found, and learning about what her mom went through broke me. I guess she had to be hospitalized, just not having closure or any answers and just wondering what had happened. And it wasn't until almost a year after she went missing, on April 26, 1997, skeletal remains were found in a wooded area that was just outside of Colville. There were some children that were playing in the area. They came across the remains, reported them to their parents, and sadly, it turned out to be those of Julie. It was years later that Israel kind of came into people's mind of being responsible for what happened to Julie. People were remembering seeing Julie walking with a really tall guy down the road. He was really tall. He was over 6 feet tall by the time he was 16 years old. And once Julie's mom, Sherry, was hearing about this and thought about it, she remembers seeing who she believed was Israel in their neighborhood and got this just like icky, eerie feeling from seeing him. Julie's best friend also said that she believes that she saw Julie talking to Israel at a pool that they were at together. It was like the local swimming pool. And she believed that Julie gave him her number and also her home address, just trusting him. This is one of those situations where he never confessed to it. There was never any evidence to tie him to Julie's death, but a lot of people who have deeply researched and investigated this case do believe that he was the one responsible for killing her. In the winter of 1996, Israel's family moved to Oregon, but this time Israel decided to stay in Coville and start working. He was 18, he had a girlfriend, he wanted to stay with her, which was something that his parents did not really like or support because of their religious beliefs, but he's 18, he felt equipped to do so. And he was really handy from learning all of these skills by helping his dad build things. So he got into the construction industry. My understanding is he only stayed behind for a few months before reuniting with his family. I guess his dad had gotten really sick and they needed Israel's support to help the family. And it's described as kind of like a little bit of like of a cult mentality that the Keys' parents particularly had. They saw their children as people who could work for them. Heidi actually referred to them as assets. I guess they were also living in tents around this time because they were trying to renovate this rundown house so that they could flip it. And then the goal was to use all of that money to move to New York. So I guess probably even just by looking at it, you'd probably think like, okay, a little culty. Now, according to Israel himself, in 1997, the Keys family frequently went to the Deschutes River. They went there to swim, and they obviously found like a secluded area because they liked to be by themselves. And this was kind of like by the riverbank and described as an area where they couldn't really be seen, but they could see other people. And Israel would go there and you could watch like the rafters and like the tubers going down the water. And it's one of these times that he had gone out to that area that he claims to have raped his first victim. This is also conflicting because then allegedly he did later say that this wasn't the first person that he had sexually assaulted. Nonetheless, according to him, it was towards the end of the day, the sun was setting, and there was this group of teenagers that were floating by. And Israel notices that at the end of the group, there was a girl that was kind of like hanging back from everybody else. So she was kind of by herself. He's described her as being between 14 to 18 with sandy blonde hair. And so he decides to just kind of like wade in the water. And when she gets close to him, he grabs her, drags her up to the bathroom that they had, like the campground bathroom, and tied her with rope to the handicap assistance bar so that she could not run. And what he said was she couldn't stop talking and it was messing with his mind, not like carrying on a conversation. She was like asking things about himself, telling him personal things about herself, and he distinctly remembers like she was humanizing herself. And I have heard this in the past, like that is usually a successful tactic and tool that victims have said they believe saved their lives, is interacting if you were ever in this situation and asking those questions, like humanizing that person, humanizing yourself, because they're trying everything that they can to dehumanize you. She kept telling him like, I promise I will not tell anybody if you let me go. Allegedly he did carry on to rape her and then let her go. And he said that this moment he never forgot because that was the only time he ever let anybody go. When she left, he saw himself as being weak. Like this was a weakness that made him sick because he had lost the control that he had. And then from that moment forward, he had vowed that when he made a decision, saw a victim, he was never ever going to let them go again. Which is so freaking sick because it's like you just hope that somebody would be like, oh my gosh, and then you've humanized somebody, realized what you've done, and been like, wow, maybe I should never do that again. But no, he was like, I'm gonna do this again, but like I'm never gonna let them go. The following year in 1998, his family, they moved to New York, and he decides that he wants to get his GED. Remember, like the kids had never gone to school, and so while he's taking those courses, another girl goes missing. On March 2nd, 1998, 19-year-old college student Suzanne Lyle went missing in Albany. She left her part-time job that she had at Crossgate Mall at around 9:20 p.m. and then walked to the bus stop that was close to the mall. And she was last seen getting off of the bus at around 9:40 11:45 and headed in the direction of her dorm room but never made it. This is another murder that Israel never confessed to, but the time and the place line up of him being there. And this has been mentioned several times, like I said, by multiple people who have heavily been investigating this case. In terms of his GED, it did not take long for him to get. Something to know about Israel is that he's described as being very intelligent. It was just, he was just one of those people where it came naturally to him, especially not having any form of education prior. And after he gets his GED, he decides that he wants to join the military. And this is something that did not sit well with his parents. His parents did not support the military. And their lack of support of him going in this direction led to a huge falling out with his dad, who ended up disowning Israel because Israel basically had said, like, these are my beliefs. And, while we're at it, I actually I don't even believe in God or religion or whatever we're following, this week. So he goes on to enlist in the Army in Albany, New York. And I guess he started out as an indirect fire infantryman, which is part of the motor platoon, from my understanding. And for my listeners who don't know what that is, so you can't see like the picture, it's like that long, I think it looks like almost like a long cannon bomb, type looking weapon that has like that big metal stand. While he was in the military, he was based in Fort Lewis in Washington, but over his career, he traveled quite a bit. He had served in Fort Hood and also as far as Egypt. And he was described as a good soldier. His platoon sergeant said Israel was an excellent soldier, actually, and he was the only one that he could count on to do his job. He always relied on him and knew that he just didn't have to follow up or check on him or anything. I guess when he first joined, he was somebody who was pretty quiet and then kind of slowly opened up, but I don't know if anybody really felt like they had a full read on him. Joining the military gave him the opportunity to learn a lot of specific skills. In the spring of 1999, he went to Panama to undergo this intensive tropical jungle warfare training called Green Hell. Apparently, everybody learns like insane combat survival skills. You get a machete and you learn further skills of how to go undetected. This was something he was really into. He learned how to navigate areas that was like really dense, didn't have a lot of vision. There was a guy that was on his platoon that said he spent a lot of time even building his own ghillie suit. This is another description for any listeners who don't know what that is, because I didn't. Well, I knew what it was like once I saw the picture, but it's like that head to toe kind of camo suit that's like kind of fuzzy. It's not fuzzy, but it's got like it looks like bushes and like trees and stuff like that. I think it also kind of looks like Bigfoot, but he was into that. He made his own. According to Israel, he had completed that training in 2000, and then he was deployed to Egypt. And he said that one weekend he took a trip to Tel Aviv, and according to him, there was two strange experiences that he had while there with women. One of them was with a Norwegian exchange student, and the other, he said, was with a sex worker. In both of those experiences, he just describes himself as losing control. He scared both of these women, and it was enough for him to realize that there obviously was still something very dark brewing in him, but he wanted to wait to act out those, urges until he was out of the military. His actual words were, "I can't wait to get out of the military so that I can start killing." Something that I thought was also very interesting about this time is one of his squad members had, I don't think that that's the right term for it, but he had remembered Israel being quite a heavy drinker, and he said that he was a happy drunk. There was only one time, I believe, that he ever really had a violent outburst where he'd thrown something. And I found that really interesting because a lot of people, they just lose that filter when they get really drunk, and you don't hear, or from serial killers who have talked about their experiences once they've been caught and stuff, usually stay away from types of things like that because they could blow their cover, I guess, and just like say something during this intoxicated state that they're in. As far as we know, he never said anything about like his dark side. He did brand himself several times while he was intoxicated, though. He had 3 brands in total. There was a smiley face on one of his arms. He had a upside down cross on his chest, and then on his shoulder he had the brand it was branded IZ for Izzy, which is what his nickname was. I believe he did those to himself, maybe to like spend money. Allegedly, he was not a big spender. He didn't really spend his money on anything except for military gear. His friends, I just kind of use the term loosely, friends, because it's like, are you really friends or know somebody when you don't know somebody? Now, in late 2000, he had made his way back to Washington, and he met a woman around this time who was 10 years older than him. They met online, and her name was Tammy, and she lived on the reservation of the Maca tribe called Nia Bay. She had an 8-year-old son, and they seemed to get along and hit it off pretty instantly. They had their first date in late December, and they were both like pretty heavy drinkers, both had similar childhoods. So sounds like they trauma bonded. And it only took a few months for Tammy to tell Israel that she was pregnant. Around this time, he was also honorably discharged from the army. Instead of him being excited that this is like a really big deal and new chapter in his life, he was most excited because now that he's finally out of the military, he can start killing people, which is super twisted for all of us who are listening who, have souls. But he said it was like sometime in his early to mid-20s that he had just decided to come to terms with who he was. He recognized that he was different from people and that he had these urges that he didn't want to suppress. He wanted to act on them. Initially, he tried to blame it on Satan and like all of like the religious things that had happened in his life, but ultimately he just describes it as being born that way. It is who he was, and he accepted that. Not only was he someone who accepted it, but he was also somebody who really enjoyed knowing something that other people didn't know. He knew that he was 2 different people and very proud of the fact that he was good at portraying somebody to people on the outside, but inside he knew like the true him was pure evil. And that scares the crap out of me, because it's like, how many people in your, like, could you potentially run into in your life who are like that? Like, I know we all have like secrets and stuff, but like this is beyond. He was also somebody who took inspo from books like Mindhunter and reading about different FBI profilers and their techniques to help him learn these techniques so that he wouldn't get caught. Like, he would be better at doing what he was setting out to do. Something that didn't deter him from setting out to carry out his plans was the birth of his daughter, which happened in October 2001. Tammy said that she did notice a change in Israel when their daughter was born. He loved being a father. It was all that he could talk about with, friends of theirs, even at work. And he allegedly ended up doing a lot of the parenting because after their daughter was born, Tammy was diagnosed with uterine cancer. She had to have an emergency hysterectomy, which is a very hard surgery to recover from. Not just the surgery part, but just like years of hormone imbalances and discomfort. So she went into a depression and became heavily reliant on pain medication as well. And this actually worked out in Israel's favor because he, appears to be this like proud and supportive partner, but he's also sadistic. So like with Tammy struggling, this gives him more time and freedom to lean into like that evil side. And another thing to know about Israel is because he knew, this side of him was there, he was very strategic and patient and had a lot of time to prepare how he was going to carry this out. And he went on a lot of road trips, which was easier to do when Tammy didn't really have a lot of questions for him. And he had what he called kill caches or like kill kits, and he stashed them all along the country on these road trips that he would take. These kits were basically 5-gallon Home Depot buckets that were filled with guns, zip ties, ammunition, rope, duct tapes, flashlight, batteries, maps, cash, and Drano to help the process of human decomposition. Allegedly, he had at least 5 of these buried in New York, Alaska, Wyoming, Vermont, and Texas. That is something that a lot of people who knew Israel say. Like, he drove. He would usually like fly into areas to like visit family or something like that. And either it would just be like, oh, I'm going to drive through here and like, take the scenic route, or say like, oh, there really wasn't a flight, or the flight was too expensive, so I'm just going to drive and then like stop in areas along the way of his destination to plan all of this out. In 2005, he and Tammy broke up after he met a woman online named Kimberly. And Kimberly seemed to be an even better partner, I guess, in his eyes, because she was a traveling nurse. So she was also gone a lot. She was from Anchorage, Alaska. So he decides to move to Anchorage to be with Kimberly. And I think he was there for a couple of years. And then eventually his daughter joined them out in Anchorage as well. And for someone who was so skilled in being undetected, he was pretty well known in the area. He started a construction business called Keys Construction, and it was pretty successful. People in the area saw him as a good, hard-working handyman. They never got a bad feeling about him. In fact, there were a lot of people who trusted him enough to have keys to their house. So if they were gone and something needed fixing, it was just like, oh yeah, like Israel's got the key. Like I said, since Kimberly did a lot of traveling, this also gave him the same opportunity. And in April 2009, it's believed he was in Hackensack, New Jersey. And around this time, 49-year-old Deborah Feldman disappeared from the area. She disappeared on April 9th, and the very next day, April 10th, 2009, we know that Israel robbed a bank in Tupper Lake, New York. Unfortunately, Deborah was kind of like the quote-unquote perfect victim. She was a drifter that was battling a terrible drug addiction. And Israel did admit taking somebody during this trip that he took, and initially denied knowing Deborah at all. But when he was shown a picture of her, apparently he looked at it and said, oh, I don't want to talk about her yet. The next time he was in an area where somebody disappeared was on June 2nd, 2011. Israel had flown from Anchorage to Chicago and then drove to Indiana. It was on June 3rd, 2011 that 21-year-old Lauren Spear disappeared after a night just out drinking with her friends at Kilroy Sports Bar in Bloomington, Indiana. She was just this very, pretty Indiana University sophomore. She went out for a few drinks, allegedly got, quite intoxicated, and unfortunately ended up walking home alone, leaving her purse and her phone at the bar still. She was last seen on surveillance cameras at 11th Street and College Avenue, leaving that Kilroy Sports Bar. Like most of Israel's suspected victims, he also did not confess to being responsible, but according to those investigating, they believe he is responsible. Something he did admit to around this time was making a 14-hour drive from Indiana to Vermont. And on June 8th, 2011, in Essex, Vermont, Bill and Lorraine Courier disappeared. This area is also one of those areas that one of Israel's kill kits were. Now, Bill was 50 years old. He worked at the University of Vermont, as a lab assistant. And Lorraine, who was 55, worked at the local hospital. I believe she worked with Bill's sister there as well. And something that just hurt my heart so much was the two of them had just celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary when Israel rolled into town. So he arrives and picks up one of his kill kits and starts stalking the area. According to him, he saw a young man initially that was driving up to an apartment complex, and he saw him, started following him around this parking lot. And his plan was that when this guy parked, he was going to attack him. And he was like already like just, to get him like right as he was coming out of his car. I guess it just like all of a sudden started raining like really heavily. And this guy got out of his car really fast. He's holding like a newspaper over his head. And shoots to go into the apartment complex. I guess Israel did try to grab him, but missed. And he told investigators that if that guy had been just a few seconds slower getting out of his car, he would have been the one that he chose to kill that night. That near miss, wasn't enough to stop him. Around 8 or 9 p.m., he went back to his hotel room at the Handy Suites, regrouped for a couple hours, and then decided to go back out. Now, I believe from some versions of like his steps, there's like several different people investigating, so sometimes it can be a little bit skewed, but I believe there was some form of correspondence that was possibly online with Bill before he had headed back out around midnight. Israel was on foot, and then he walked into their neighborhood. One day, I'm just gonna learn how to talk. Neighborhood on Colbert Street. And he arrives at Bill and Lorraine's house. All of the lights are off. Looks like everybody's in bed. And he starts to stake out the house because he's decided he has a couple of rules when it comes to killing. He does not want to kill at a house where there are kids or dogs. His no kid rule had come after his daughter was born, and then the no dog rule was because he said that they're just a hassle and another obstacle that he doesn't want to deal with, not because he has like a heart or anything. So he said he went to check the backyard and sees that Bill and Lorraine have a pool, but he doesn't see any like kid floaties, or like a doghouse or dog toys. So he's confident that there are neither in the house. The first thing he does is he cuts the power line, cuts the phone line, and then he walks to the garage, gets in through a window, grabs this crowbar that he sees on the wall, and then goes up and like breaks the glass door to get inside of the house. Now, since he cut off all the power, the house is really dark, and he says that he's able to see because he's wearing like one of those headlamps. He goes down the hall, finds the master bedroom, and he walks in and then just says like in seconds, he wakes and zip ties Bill and Lorraine, and he calls it this blitz attack. And everything happened so fast because it was so dark. All of a sudden, these people open their eyes to see this like blinding light. And, you're seeing like probably just like all of these like orbs and stuff like that, not able to get your bearings. So it sounds like it wasn't that hard for him to take control. He has a gun at this point and he's pointing it at them. And then he also demands that they give him any guns that they have. Lorraine gives him a .38 Smith Wesson that she has in her nightstand, very willingly, like pleads with him, like absolutely take it, take whatever you want from here. He took their ATM cards, they gave him their PIN, grabbed suitcases that they had in their room and started packing with jewelry, clothes, prescription medication that they had from the medicine cabinet. And apparently while he's ransacking things, Lorraine tried to fight him, but it didn't go well. He ended up throwing her on the bed, shoving her into the pillow, saying like, if you do that again, I'm not going to be happy. He keeps rummaging through all of their stuff and comes across an electric strawberry, which is an Army insignia for the 25th Infantry Division. So at this point, Israel realizes that Bill and him served on the same unit, and he kind of uses this to like further toy and mess with Bill. Bill probably saw this kind of as a perhaps a positive thing, something that he could use to humanize, right? And like build this connection. And I'm sure that was only further, gave him further hope when Israel says to Bill and Lorraine, okay, you're coming with me. I'm taking you to another location. Put on your slippers, because there's glass in the garage and I don't want you to cut your feet. Now, either he was doing that just because he was like, okay, like, I don't want you to cut your feet, but it was probably because he didn't want like any, blood left behind. They get out to the garage. They all get in Bill and Lorraine's green Saturn, and Israel drives them to this abandoned farmhouse that he had staked out and spotted earlier. He says that while they're driving there, Bill is trying to reason with him. He's like, just let us go. We haven't really seen you. I know, like, to you, you probably think that you're in too deep, but you're not you can still walk away. And Israel said that as he's listening to him, he just kind of laughed to himself. And in his head, he was like, you have no idea. Like, I've done this before. That is not happening again. So he gets them to this farmhouse that has this rundown basement, brings Bill downstairs and ties him up to this stool that's down there. He goes back out to get Lorraine, and he finds that she's outside of the car already and just starting to try to run for her life. It frustrates me so much because it's like, when I read, it's not that I desensitize. I go into like this like visual, but like not a real visual. And it's almost like I'm reading a book and I'm like, oh my God, like go. And then it just breaks my heart because I know that, yeah, he eventually catches up to her and he overpowers her, and he's livid that this is the second time that, you know, that she's tried to fight for her life, like heaven forbid. He drags Lorraine into the farmhouse. He forces her upstairs instead of taking her downstairs where Bill is, and duct tapes her wrists and ankles to a bed that there is up there, and puts this rope around her neck and wraps that around the mattress so that she cannot leave again. And at this point, he starts assaulting her. And while this is happening, he hears Bill trying to also escape in the basement. So he goes down to see what's going on and sees that the stool that he had left Bill on was broken, and it was like he was able to like loosen his restraints a bit. And now he's pissed that Bill is also, you know, trying to save his life. According to Israel, his plan was to rape both Bill and Lorraine. So he does try to subdue him, but Bill he knows like this is his only chance and he's got to fight with everything that he has. So Israel looks and sees that there's a shovel in the basement, and he hits Bill with it, and it takes several hits for him to incapacitate him. And since Bill is not backing down, Israel runs upstairs. He grabs a .22 caliber gun, goes back down, and shoots Bill not only once, but he shot him in the arms, the chest, and the head. Bill falls to the floor dead. And Israel says that at this point he goes outside to regroup and have a cigar before going back upstairs to Lorraine. Yeah. Processing all of that is, like I said, like sometimes I go into this like, I don't know, where I have to go to properly research and get everything that I need, the disassociation and horror, like that just doesn't even explain what that would have been like. You know, somebody breaking into your house, taking you away to this abandoned farmhouse, terrorizing you. You're pleading for your life, and there's just like, you can't reason or get through or, you know, like find this like glimmer of hope. There's just like no remorse. Like the devil and evil, like I don't feel like those descriptions are strong enough for him. After his cigar, he goes back upstairs and he uses a knife to cut Lorraine's clothes off of her. He rapes her 2 times, and then he cuts her restraints off of her. I'm sure maybe that, you know, split second giving her some form of hope, but instead walks her down to the basement so that she can see her husband dead on the floor. And he sits her down beside him and then goes behind her and strangles her to death. If that's not gruesome enough, he then also just, for his own, I don't know, probably sick, twisted thrill, took a zip tie and then put that around her neck as well, like as tight as he could. I read that this was his preferred method of killing, strangulation, and most likely one of the reasons why he had gone out for a cigar and regrouped was because he had this plan to also rape Bill, and I would assume strangle him. So when he felt like he had no other choice but to shoot him, it kind of like set everything off, which was interesting because he also like had a fascination and loved guns, but that was not like his preferred method of killing. He only did that, he said, if like he felt like there was no other option, which, you know, Bill trying to fight for his life, he felt like he didn't have another option. After murdering Bill and Lorraine, Israel moved their bodies to like the corner of this basement, and he placed 2 garbage bags on each of them. There was They each had one over their head and then like their feet so that it concealed the bodies. And then he poured Drano on them and then also just like threw random items like old shelving and stuff like that that was left in the basement on their bodies to, I don't know, kind of conceal it and make it look like it was just kind of like an abandoned corner of garbage in the corner. His initial plan was to burn the farmhouse down, but by the time he was done murdering them, the sun was rising and he was like, okay, I don't really have a lot of time here. And he believed that there was, the smell of leaving them was going to be so awful that if anybody did come to purchase this property to restore it, they would probably just demo the whole building and then rebuild from there. So that's what he was banking on. He left them and drove their car and abandoned it in a Rite Aid parking lot, making sure to do this like just out of sight of cameras so that he wasn't seen. He also took like any of the evidence that he had used in the assaults, both of their debit cards, the gun that he took, the suitcases full of stuff, and got rid of it. Allegedly, most of it was in the Blake Falls Reservoir. I don't know if everything has been recovered. So it would have been, I guess, that morning that he would have left because it was like leaning into that day. Bill's sister calls Bill to check on Lorraine because, like I said, the two of them worked at a hospital together, and it was extremely out of character for Lorraine to just not show up to work, especially not to call her sister-in-law and give her the heads up as to why. So when she calls Bill, obviously he also doesn't answer, and this is even further unlike both of them because he hadn't shown up for work. They've both been at their jobs for over or almost 20 years and were extremely reliable. Bill's sister decides because of this, she goes to their house, sees that their car's not there, and immediately calls the police. And for the most part, when police arrive, there didn't appear to be like anything too concerning, but the car's missing and then there is broken glass in the garage. Bill's sister also noticed that there was medication that he needed due to, I think, like some fusing in his spine that he would never leave without if they were just like going off somewhere. Lorraine's glasses were also on her nightstand, which she didn't leave without, and then she did notice that their gun was missing from the nightstand. By the time a search started for Bill and Lorraine, Israel had already left Vermont. He drove back to Chicago, took a flight to San Francisco, stayed there the night, and then made it back to Anchorage by the 16th. And this is his pattern. He immediately gets as far away from his crimes as soon as possible. Once the news break out about the courier's disappearance, a witness does come forward and says that they saw somebody driving Bill and Lorraine's green Saturn, and it wasn't Bill or Lorraine, and was able to provide some details for a sketch artist. This was a pretty like quick drive by, so unfortunately it wasn't a dead ringer because this person is going off of like a split second memory. Taking that into consideration, when I saw it, I was like, it's not that bad. The face is definitely longer in the sketch and like smaller nose and eyes. And when Israel saw this, he saw this on the news and later told investigators that he was like, oh, okay, like I'm fine because that doesn't look anything like me, and I'm also all the way back in Anchorage already. Because of that, Bill and Lorraine's case went cold for almost a year, and it wasn't until Israel went off of his plan, like his strict rules and plans, and made several mistakes that led to not only solving their murder, but another. Something he had promised himself was that he was never going to kill or take anybody in the area that he was living in, and he ends up going off plan. On February 1st, 2012, 18-year-old Samantha Koenig from Anchorage was working the night shift at the Common Grounds. This is a coffee shop, but it's like it looks kind of like a tiny home type setup. It's not like a food truck. It looks like a little cabin almost, where you just drive up or walk up to the window, order your coffee, and go. And this is a job that Samantha was really excited about. She had her eyes on this type of, I don't know if it was this type of job or working specifically at Common Grounds, but it was a big deal. Samantha was born and raised in Anchorage. She was born on August 30th, 1993, and she's described as somebody who loved her friends. She loved fishing with her dad, loved animals, playing music, photography, writing music and poetry. She also loved playing Call of Duty with her boyfriend, Dwayne, and loved her 2 dogs, Sheba and Militia. Her family describes her as somebody who had the biggest personality. She had one of those smiles. I don't want it to sound like overused or cheesy or anything. It's just what it was. One of those smiles that just lit up a room. And if you heard her laugh, it was something that would brighten anyone's day. Her dad said that it was the same laugh that she had always had since she was a little girl. It was like very strong laugh and have like a little snort in it. And he never wanted her to outgrow that. And she never did. She also had a very infectious charm and brilliant sarcastic wit. Her long-term career goals were I guess, had sky's the limit. She considered enlisting in the Navy and becoming a nurse. She also thought, maybe something to do with animals would be really well suited for her, maybe like the equestrian field. Prior to getting to those goals, though, regardless, she had just begun working as a barista at Common Grounds, and she had been there for about a month and a half. She was a energetic, enthusiastic, excited employee. And I guess Israel had semi-planned to find somebody working this type of job. He knew that it was usually teenagers who worked it. They were usually females. And because of the setup and it being very small, they often worked alone. Ultimately, he chooses Common Grounds. He arrives at 8 p.m. and Sam is closing up for the night. All of a sudden, she sees there's one last customer walking up to the window, and he's wearing a ski mask, hands her this thermos and asks her for an Americano, and she doesn't think anything of it. She's smiling, enthusiastic. She makes him one, and when she turns around to give him his coffee, he pulls a gun on her and says that he is robbing the place. So she puts her hands up. He tells her to shut the lights off, turn the open sign off. She does. He tells her to give him all of the money in the till, which she does. And as she's handing it through the window, he tells her to turn around. So like her back is facing the window. As she does, he zip ties her wrists together behind her back. He then jumps through the window, it is pretty big. I've seen photos of the little setup. It's not like one of the drive-through size windows. It's like a regular window. Quickly, he's asking her all types of questions so that he can get as much information as quickly as possible. He makes sure that there wasn't some type of emergency button that she pressed, and she says no. He even says, like, if you're not telling me the truth, I'm gonna know because I have a police scanner. And she says no. He asks if she has a car. She did have a car, but it wasn't there. Her and her boyfriend were sharing it at the time. And so she asks who's picking her up, and Israel recalls her saying that it was her dad that was picking up. Now, it was actually Dwayne who was coming, and this whole thing it's just like one of those just devastating, weird, terrible twists of fate. Dwayne said around 7:45, she called him to say not to worry, to come and pick her up because she was just going to get a ride from her cousin. He had her truck. He was at work as well, and he was working a much longer shift. When he found out that her cousin was going to pick her up, he was like, no, don't worry about it. I can come and get you. And she said, well, no, like it sounded like she didn't really want to inconvenience anybody, and said, instead I'll just walk. And he was like, no, I do not want you to walk. So he goes to his boss and he's like, listen, can I just clock out briefly, go pick up my girlfriend, drop her off at home, and then come back, clock back in and finish my shift? And his boss was like, yeah, that's fine. So he tells Samantha this, and his understanding is that she's gonna wait for him. By the time he arrives, though, which is around 8:30, the lights are off, it looks shut down, and he assumes that maybe she had walked or her cousin had picked her up. He tries calling a couple times. There's no answer. Little does he know, he basically just missed them. Israel told investigators that when he found out that somebody was picking her up, At first he thought, okay, I'm going to wait and take whoever is coming as well. Quickly, again, went off course, decided not to do that. He grabbed a stack of napkins, shoved them in Samantha's mouth to make sure that she didn't scream, and walked her towards his car. He had parked pretty far away because he didn't want to get picked up from any security cameras. And I guess he sees on the floor, there's this like Canon camera that was just dropped. So he bends over to pick it up because he's like, oh, perfect. Like, I'll take this with me and I'm going to sell it and make some money. And while he does this and he's like briefly distracted, he said that Samantha tries to run away. He quickly tackles her. He has a gun on him and he like shoves the gun into her and says like, if you try that again, I'm going to kill you. And he's almost caught again when he, like pulls her up and they start walking because people start walking past them. So he pulls her close and he's like still has this gun on her and he says, you need to like lean into me and act like you're drunk, like that I'm holding you up and we're wobbling and I'm just taking care of you, getting you back to the car. And I cannot imagine what that would have been like for her. It literally made me sick and just like want to cry at the same time because the fear that she obviously was feeling just like paralyzed enough to comply. She didn't scream. Also keep in mind she's zip tied. She has napkins in her mouth and a gun on her. And so it's like that opportunity walks by and they make it to his vehicle and he shoves her in. He tells Sam, everything's going to be okay. I'm not going to kill you. I'm just taking you to another location so that I can hold you and get some ransom money. And so now she's got this sliver of hope again. And while they're driving, another time, it's like so twisted. They pull up to a red light and a police car with 2 police officers in it pulls up beside them. And Sam is once again just like completely frozen, which is so understandable. Like as an 18-year-old girl who's trusting and who wants to believe that this man is not going to harm her, especially if she just like cooperates and proves that, I'm okay. The quicker, he gets what he wants, like the sooner this is going to end, like everything is going to be okay. So the light turns green and they drive off. The ransom plan wasn't like a ruse. He did want to get ransom money for Samantha. So as they're driving, he said he realizes that he needs an untraceable phone to get his ransom. Initially, he said they were going to go to the Walmart, and then when he drove by, it was too busy. So he made the decision to go back to Common Grounds where Sam's cell phone was. And when they first left, they didn't lock the doors. So he walks in and grabs her cell phone and then is like, oh, it's a good thing that we came back here, because he sees that there was a few zip ties that had like fallen on the ground, which he was like, oh my gosh, those probably had DNA on them. So he picks those up, leaves, decides to lock the doors and make it look like it was, a proper closing. Then the 2 of them drive back to it's not Israel's home, where Israel is living. Remember, he's living with Kimberly. And according to the 2 of them, they were broken up around this time. They had been broken up for a little bit, but she told Israel he could stay there with his daughter until they figured out their next steps and until she like wrapped up all of her school year. So he goes inside, makes sure that the 2 of them are sleeping before taking Samantha into this shed that he had set up in the backyard. I guess this shed it was just like a kind of like a man cave shed. It was like known to be his shed, have like all of his things in it, nothing that Kimberly would have ever needed to go in there. So he was confident that like, this is my shed. It had 2 heaters in it, a radio, and he also had this tarp laid out. Once he gets Samantha into the shed, he turns the radio up all the way with like heavy metal music so that if she screams, no one can hear her. And he wrapped a rope around her neck that he screwed into the wall so that she was like anchored to the shed. At this point, he tells Sam that he needs her debit card for ransom because he's going to request that the money be put into her account. And she tells him that she doesn't have her card on her, but she does share one with her boyfriend. And if he goes to her house, the card is usually in the glove compartment of her truck. So she gives him the address to her home to go and see if the truck is there, and gives the pin to the card. He drives over, he parks a ways away, walks up to Samantha's truck, which is there at this time, opens up the truck and starts going through her wallet to get this card. And as he's looking, her boyfriend, Dwayne, is standing looking at him, and he's wearing a ski mask. So Israel is, not Dwayne. They kind of like both look at each other for a moment. And then Israel says all of a sudden, Dwayne turns around, runs back inside the house, and he goes to get Sam's dad, who also lives with them, so that he can help, because he thinks he's just caught somebody like breaking in for like change or something like that. He grabs the card, goes back to the car down the street. By the time Dwayne and her dad come back, he's gone. In Dwayne and her dad's defense, because I thought about this, I was like, oh, like did they call the police or anything like that at that time? But for them, they didn't think that this had anything to do with Sam at all. They just thought that this was just like a weird night, because for time-wise, by the time this had happened, he had gotten a text at about 1:55 from Sam's phone saying, like, F you, I know what you did. I'm going to stay with friends for a couple days. Please let my dad know. And he doesn't know what she's talking about, but he thought, okay, like she's really heated about this whole like pickup situation. Maybe like I misunderstood something. He was still trying to call her, but not getting any answers. And so he just thought she needs to calm down. This incident is so unrelated. Whoever this was, like, they're long gone. We couldn't even give a description to the police anyways, and just kind of like left it at like, we scared him away. You know, we'll keep an eye out, and if we see him again, we'll do something. And that was it. I guess once Israel got the card, he forgot what the pin was that Sam had given him. So he goes back to her, gets the pin, goes to the ATM to make sure it works, which it does, and then goes back. And by the time he gets back, the sun is almost up. So he goes into the shed, gives Sam some water, he said. He said he poured himself a glass of wine. They shared a cigarette. You can only imagine, like with his other victims too, like what sense of false hope that is giving. Like it's so freaking demented. He even cut her zip ties restraints and the rope that he had off of her briefly, probably again just to like further give hope. And then it didn't take long for him to like restrain her so that he could also rape her 2 times. He said that Sam asked if he was going to kill her, and she tried to talk him out of it, but he made up his mind. He stuck to that because he didn't want to have any regrets like he had in the past. And he said he started strangling her. He describes it as taking way too long for him. So even though it was his preferred method of killing, he stabbed her in the back and then just let her bleed out into the shed. Ugh, like it's so freaking disturbing to even just like say out loud. At this point, he left her there to die, went inside to have a shower. And then he said he went back out and rolled her body up in a tarp, and then put her in like this cabinet that he had in there. He then turned off the heaters so that there was no like warmth and it would be cold in there to preserve the body longer, and then double padlocked the shed. At this point, it's like morning. And so he wakes up his 10-year-old daughter, not to go to school or anything, but he had already pre-planned a family vacation. They're going on a cruise. Literally, like, what is a word that's more twisted than demented? Like, it's freaking so beyond disturbing, like disgusting. So once again, he is gone right after a murder, even though like, you know, like I guess that's still a little bit he stuck to the plan. Usually it wouldn't even be like anywhere he is, because now he's got to go back there. But for the meantime, he's gone. According to Kimberly, she also left town. She left a couple days after though. So he and his daughter were already gone to visit family in Texas. And she was joining them for this 5-day carnival cruise. I think it was out of New Orleans into Mexico. So I think it's like even though they weren't together, they were still on obviously decent terms if they were still living together, and then trying to keep things as normal as possible, like going on this like little friendly cruise. So that was a few days. They parted ways. She went to go do some vacationing with a friend, and then he went back to visit his family again in Texas. According to Kimberly, she arrived back at the house before Israel and his daughter, but looking in the shed was just, it was never something that she did. There was never any inkling that she should look in there. She didn't have any of her things out there. She knew that everything that he stored, like for him and his daughter, or what she believed he was using it for, was out there. So she just had no reason to go out there. Had she and looked in the cabinet, she would have found Samantha. Going back to the morning that Israel and his daughter had left to go and visit family, that morning, Samantha was reported missing. Her father and her boyfriend knew that following day she was scheduled to work, so they wanted to meet up with her and talk to her, since they had been trying to call and text her throughout the evening and weren't able to talk to her. So they meet her there to see her in person, and obviously she doesn't show up. And that's when everybody started kind of comparing stories, and they find out from other employees that there was cash that was missing from the register and that the shop wasn't closed up properly. Apparently her boss had texted her to find out what was going on and why, things were missing and not closed up. And he did get a reply from her phone just saying, "Bad day." Unfortunately, due to the fact that Sam had recovered from addiction in the past, the assumption was that she had stolen money from her job and relapsed. Another thing that had delayed the urgency in her search was that when the security footage was initially reviewed, it seemed like nothing was out of the ordinary. From what they could see, everything looked okay. Like it was Sam closing. It looked standard, closed lights, left by herself. However, they were looking at the wrong date. So then when they realized, oh, this was the day before and not the actual day that Sam was abducted, they review that date and see her abduction happen. Again, it's just like piling on more of these, just unfortunate circumstances where things just kind of went in different directions. Investigation efforts were definitely derailed in different, in all of these different, I guess, like getting caught up in like the speculation of the rumor mill is what I'm trying to say. Some people thought that it was Sam relapsing. Some people thought that acquaintances of hers who were dealing weed, she got caught up in that, and that they had her hiding out in a crawl space, so there were search warrants to go and look for her. Meanwhile, like, we know that that's not where she was. She was in the shed, dead, while Israel was on a cruise. And while he's on this cruise, her family, her father, he's on the news, pleading for her, like to hold on, and he's looking, and anybody who has her to just let her go. And what really, really broke my heart is he says on there, like, she's so amazing. She's so funny. She's the girl that everybody considers their best friend. Like, she has so many best friends that think like they're her like number one, because that is how amazing she is and caring she is. And he says, it's so painful to see on the internet that people are slandering her, and they're calling her a drug addict, and they're calling her names and saying, making these assumptions of what she's done, and it's not who she is. It's not who she's made her life to be. Again, we've said this so many times, like, even if she was addicted to drugs at that time, does that make her less of a human that needs to be found? Absolutely not. Seeing that, I see that a lot, and it just breaks my heart that, I don't know, people just think that because you are behind a screen and it's like the internet, like it's like the Badlands, like you could just do, there's no rules, you can just do whatever. People leave nasty comments, they just say like terrible things. When it comes to me, like, I definitely have grown like a much thicker skin when it comes to myself. Like, sometimes you'll see I'll clap back in the comments. Most of the times I just ignore it. But it breaks my heart when somebody like personally attacks a victim or has these assumptions. I'm not like that. Like, I don't like that is what I want to say. Of course you're not like that, Sherrilyn. I don't like that because families see that. And I've said that before. Like, please just be responsible when you are commenting on things, especially my videos. The families, they see these things. So please, if you see a nasty comment on somebody else's page, even on mine, like, please bring it to my attention. Or I think if you put like mod or whatever, or tag Sienna Laporte, she'll see it and delete it. I don't like that. I don't ever want my comment section to be somewhere where a family member goes and is upset. Words are hurtful, and these people are going through absolute hell. They are experiencing agony that most of us will never understand. So like the least they need is just nasty comments. You know, we need to uplift. Anyways, that broke my heart when I heard him say that, because I was like, oh my God, people are dick. I read her obituary, and there was a part that just like, oh my God, it just touched me so bad. And it gave me like a really good idea of the type of family that she had. So you know how it says like in lieu of flowers, you know, the family is requesting, I don't know, it could be anything. Theirs was that you keep Samantha in your thoughts by sharing a smile and a laugh with those that you encounter. Yeah, it's just like, oh my God, freaking adore, like just so sweet. Like, why? What the fuck is wrong with people? After murdering Samantha, it is believed that Israel was not done killing. He wouldn't confess to anything after, but the FBI believed that it fits his MO. On February 15th, 2012, 58-year-old James Jimmy Tidwell, he went by Jimmy, went missing after his shift at his job. He was married with 2 children, and he was last seen 2 hours outside of Dallas in Longview, where he was working the night shift as an electrician, and this was a job that he had for a decade. The last time he was seen was at 5:30 in the morning. His Ford pickup truck was found. It was found 5 miles from his house, and inside his glasses were in there, but his wallet, his keys, and his phone was missing. The reason there is the assumption that Israel is responsible is because the very next day, on February 16th in Aledo, Texas, Israel burglarized and burned a house down. He said he set the house on fire as a distraction so that he could go and rob the bank, because this was a small town, so like everybody would be at the fire, not at the bank. It wasn't, I mean, like the worst plan. This guy planned out like everything, but he said he lost track of time because he was standing on the hill watching the chaos that was going around with everybody trying to put this fire out and make sure that everybody was out of the house. And so that he missed his opportunity to go and rob the bank. Again, not deterred, he ended up just picking another bank that was like 30 miles further away in a different town. And the way that he had confessed to this, it just gives you an idea of like, I don't know, like how cold and callous he said. It was during an interrogation, and he said, if you want, I could give you an arson in Texas. I burned a house down, but if I tell you I want a cigar for that. So we'll get into that in a little bit of like how he used, like, I don't know, like briberies, I guess. Yeah, bribery to like pull confessions out of him. So the bank that he robbed, I know I'm gonna say it wrong. Aisley? Please tell me in the comments. I know I mispronounce everything. That's where it was, okay? In Texas. There's security footage of it, and in it, we know it's Israel, but there's like, he's wearing it like a disguise, and he's got long brown, like kind of like curly wavy hair, and he's wearing this white hard hat. It's the same type of hard hat that Jimmy has. Something to know is around this time, Israel's hair was short, so he didn't have this long brown wavy hair. And when investigators asked him, where did you buy the hair, Israel said, you don't have to buy real hair to get real hair, and then laughed. So the disturbing, sick, disgusting, demented assumption is that like he like was wearing Jimmy's hair. After this, he makes it back from his vacation. It takes him a couple days, he said, before he had an opportunity where his daughter and Kimberly are out of the house and he could go to the shed to check on Samantha's body. And he decides he still wants a ransom, even though she's dead. So he knows that he needs to take a picture of her to make it look like she's alive, or otherwise, you know, that's, people are going to ask for proof of life. Now, because of the weather, she is completely frozen. So he starts thawing out her body. He uses a hair dryer, and in his words, after he's done that, because she is now warm, he decided to assault her. Yeah. Yep. He then, we're assuming, grabs some of Kimberly's makeup and just starts packing it on to give her color. He braids her hair, and then he tried to super glue her eyes open, but it wasn't working. So he decided to sew them open with a curved needle and some fishing line. I literally can't even effing process. Like, this poor baby girl, 18 years old. My daughter, my oldest daughter, is 18 years old next month. Like, it, I don't even know what, can't even think about it. Can't do it. Can't go there. Public lynching should be like a thing. You know what I mean? Where are we at with Jurassic Jail? I know I'm spearheading this whole thing, but I need the people to help. We need Jurassic Jail. Now, once he has her looking the way that he wants to try to pass that she's alive, he holds up the Anchorage Daily newspaper that's from a couple of days before. And he specifically chose a couple days before because he wasn't in Alaska at that time. He takes the picture on a Polaroid. This is how much he's like, playing things out. Now, something to know is that the actual picture of Samantha has never been released to the public. Dark Minds did a reenactment of it. And so the photo that I'm showing and that you may have seen or will see in the future online is what was come up with. So this is not the photo. So he takes it on the Polaroid because that kind of, gives the blur, then scans the picture so that the quality is even lower. And then he uses a typewriter to type the ransom note. So that, again, so not only you're taking the quality down, but this is a scanned picture. So you can't kind of tie it back to the film or the, I've seen that happen before where it's been like duct tape that was traced back to a specific store because of the fibers in it. So he's thinking about all of this stuff. Once he has everything he needs, he sends a text to Samantha's boyfriend, Dwayne, from Samantha's phone. And the text says, Connor Park sign under pic of Albert. Ain't she pretty? This obviously drums up like panic, hope, excitement, all of the things because nobody had heard from Sam since her abduction. So everybody gets to the park immediately. And on the park's message board, there is a picture of a missing dog named Albert. And then underneath it, there is a ransom note with this scanned picture of Sam. In the ransom note, it demands $30,000 be put into Sam's bank account. And then, it came with the proof of life photo of Sam to, ensure once you do this, you'll get her back. Once the photo of Sam was given to investigators, most of them looked at it and thought, we don't think that she's alive. But I also don't think that anybody wanted to believe that, especially her family. They wanted hope. They're seeing something, and you're gonna tell yourself whatever it is that you can to just hold on to that hope. I guess there was so much back and forth on it though that they ended up calling an expert in snuff films for their take on it. And even that person said they couldn't really be sure. So ultimately the family puts the $30,000 into her bank account, and I absolutely do not blame them at all. At this point, they want to do whatever they can to get her back. And so they just wait for this person to use the debit card. They're also on pins and needles because within that ransom note, it says on there, I'm probably not going to be using it in Anchorage because of, how small and tight knit Anchorage is. So they're on guard and the lookout, knowing that this person's going to have a chance to get away somewhat and then use the card somewhere that we don't even know where that first withdrawal is going to be. Sure enough, there were a couple pings from an ATM that was somewhere in Alaska, but by the time they got to the location, the person was gone, the person being Israel. Because her ATM had a daily limit of only $500, that was all Israel could withdraw at a time. So what he would do is he would take cash out late at night in one state and then cross the border. So he'd be close to another border. And then just after midnight, it was technically the next day, he would take out another $500. Each time he's doing this, he's wearing a mask, he's wearing gloves, he's fully concealed. So he's concealed head to toe so nobody can identify him. It also gives them a really good idea, them being investigators, a really good idea of what they're dealing with, because they see that there were 2 withdrawals in Alaska. Then there's a withdrawal in Arizona, another one in Lordsburg, New Mexico, and then Humboldt, Texas. And this ends up being what leads to his capture. When he withdraws $500 from the ATM in Humboldt, his rental car is picked up on surveillance. This is a task on its own. The rental car is a white Ford Focus, which is popular, especially with rentals. I feel like so many rentals are like white. So FBI in Anchorage, they put out a bolo that they're looking for this middle-aged white man who seems to be tall that's driving a white Ford Focus. And even with a lot stacked against them, since this is like an extremely popular vehicle and they're in like the second largest states, Corporal Brian Henry literally struck gold. It was March 13th, 2012, and Israel was pulling out of a hotel after attending his sister's wedding. And there was something about the whole situation that just caught this officer's attention. And so he's kind of like following and waiting for an opportunity to just like go with that gut feeling. And Israel like just slightly goes over the speed limit. And even though, you know, he's prepared a lot throughout his life, he was not ready for this at all. He gets pulled over. Corporal Henry asks him where he's from. And Israel says, Alaska. And he's like, oh, like you're really far from home. Like in my 22 years of doing traffic stops, never have I ever pulled somebody over from Alaska. And the way he tells the story, he said like in that minute, he was like, I knew like this was the bolo that we had just heard about. Keep in mind also, like the bolo was just for the vehicle. They have no idea who they're looking for. They're just like looking for this really popular vehicle. But he goes with his gut and like flags over an FBI agent to come and help conduct a vehicle search. In the car, they found rolls of cash. These rolls of cash had like dye packs in them. So they were like, that's a little bit suspicious. There were also white tennis shoes in the car, which the officers that were doing, like going through all of the surveillance of the ATM saw that the person who was withdrawing money from Sam's account was wearing. And then in the trunk, they found a ski mask as well as Sam's cell phone that had been disassembled, like the batteries were taken out of it, and they found her ATM card in his wallet. He tried to explain it all away as saying like some stranger came by and just like threw stuff in his car and that's why he was in possession of them, and that the only reason he was out in Texas was that he was there for his sister's wedding. And I do believe, I don't know why my mind is going blank right now, but that he was at his sister's wedding as well. Like, so it was another thing like he had planned, you know, during his travels, his road. It was an excuse to like go out there, and then I'm sure he was just gonna fudge more shit up. So he is immediately arrested on the scene, taken to jail in Texas, and they wanted to interrogate him, but he wouldn't talk. So they just give the information to the agents in Alaska, who now have a name to look into. And they are just not computing. Like, he does not look like a serial killer to them. And the only thing that they can see on his record is that he had a DUI. So everybody they speak to is like, he was such a nice guy. He, you know, lived with his girlfriend who he seemed to still get along with, and his daughter. They lived in a nice neighborhood. He's extremely trustworthy, running this construction business that, you know, people have given him keys to their houses. So on March 27th, 2012, he is officially transported back to Anchorage, Alaska, and he is arraigned on 1 count of access device fraud for having and using Sam's debit card. At this point, he knows that he doesn't really have a lot of options, and he just starts dropping breadcrumbs in exchange for favors, like I had mentioned earlier about like, oh, I'll give you an arson for a cigar. At this point, they still don't know if Sam's alive, so they're willing to cooperate. He doesn't hold on to the fact at all that she's dead. He tells them pretty quickly, like, yes, she is no longer here. I'm the one responsible. But before he tells them where her body is, he has some requests. He wanted peanut butter Snicker bars, some Americano coffee, and backwoods Wild and Mild cigars. He also wanted to make sure that his name was not leaked to the press because he did not want his 10-year-old daughter finding out about what he had done. He says in his interview, like, I'll tell you everything, like I'll give you every gory detail that you want. Those were his words. But I do not want this out. I want my child to have a chance to grow up, and you know, she's safe right now. I don't want her to see any of this, and I don't want this hanging over her head. And while I can sympathize for that, for his daughter, not him at all, it's like, screw you. You have put, like, you are the one who put her in that position, nobody else. But they do want to bring Sam home back to her family, so they agree to his terms. His interrogations are really unsettling. Like I said, Victoria, I believe she has all of them on there. They're unsettling. He speaks like very, very low, almost like he's like teleporting himself back to those moments and like reliving the evil that he did. Unfortunately, the tapes are very painful to listen to, not just because of the content. I mean, that's like the biggest thing, but there is so much static. It's barely audible.
I don't know.
You're not going to take any of my suggestions at this point?
Yeah, I won't.
I could tell you everything today, and they could still say whatever.
Through his recount of what happened to Samantha, he gives them every disturbing detail. Like every detail that I have provided is because these were his words. He was the one who told everybody everything that happened. And I've talked about this before, like while I can appreciate like just the honesty of like not having like second doubts, it still doesn't make it any less disturbing to actually hear it, you know? He also basically admits that he is a sexually motivated killer, and he does say that they could find Samantha's remains potentially at the bottom of Matanuska Lake. And the way that he got rid of her is, oh my God, like as if it's not all like the most gruesome and disturbing things. Like it is so enraging, disgusting. I don't have the words anymore. In his shed, he dismembered her. He put her remains in 5 different bags, and he said he triple bagged them so that there was no like leaks. And he brought her remains in several trips to the lake. Ice fishing is very common there, so he made it look like he was ice fishing, like set up a shelter, cut his hole in the ice, and unwrapped her remains and attached weights with wire to them and threw them into the lake. He said that he had to do this in several trips. It was a total of 2 days. And in the midst of this all, he did actually take the opportunity to fish, caught a fish, and then took it home and cooked it for dinner for his daughter and for Kimberly. Again, fucking public lynching, Jurassic jail, anyone. The positive, like the comfort, the only comfort that I could find in that was that on April 2nd, 2012, the FBI underwater search team was able to discover Samantha's remains and, you know, at least like give her a proper burial and her family like some closure, because I cannot imagine what that extra element adds to knowing where your loved one is and then not being able to retrieve them. So at this point, they don't even know about Bill and Lorraine. They do have strong suspicion that Samantha was not his first or only victim. And so they ask, like, is there anything else that you have to tell us? And he just wants more bargaining. He's like, I want more cigars, more Americano, more chocolate bars, Snicker bars. And he also wants the New York Times delivered to his cell every morning. He also wants to make sure that he does not see his name in there, and no details about what happened to Samantha. And then he also wants an execution date. He made it very clear he was not somebody that was going to be in prison for the rest of his life. He said that he actually intended to have a shootout with police when they pulled over, but he didn't have like access to his gun. So he tells them if he does not get an execution date within a year, he was just going to do it himself. And so he's told, you know, we can try, but we can't pull all of these strings for you unless you give us more. So at this point, that is when he admits to all of the horrific things that he did to Bill and Lorraine. And remember when Israel was like, I don't have time to burn down the farmhouse, but it probably won't matter anyways, because if someone's going to buy this, they're just going to demolish the house because it's worthless. He was right. The farmhouse was demolished at the end of October 2011. And it basically happened exactly like he said. Like, buyers came to the property. They were like, this is not worth renovating. Let's just tear the whole thing down. And then they like filled the basement area. And I do want to give gratitude to the investigators on this case specifically, because they were determined to find the remains of Bill and Lorraine. And so they dug up that hole. They dug up where that basement would have been to try to find their remains, and they didn't come up with anything. So they were like, okay, all of the stuff from the basement, maybe there's a possibility that all of that was just like grabbed and taken to the landfill. So they contacted the Coventry landfill. And why I wanted to just like take a quick minute for this was because I don't know if you remember, but I did a case on the serial killer in Canada who disposed of his victims' remains in the garbage, in the, you know, like the public garbage bins. And to this day, the victims of him, the victims' loved ones of him, are still pleading for Ontario officials to search the landfill. If you search #search the landfill, you'll see it, to bring their loved ones home. I get it. It's not a cheap process. It requires a lot of resources. But what's different about these two cases is the investigators in Bill and Lorraine's case, they're hopeful. They are like, we are going to search. And they searched for over 2 months. Unfortunately, they were not able to recover their remains. But there are two really big differences here. The team that was looking for Bill and Lorraine, they were barely given a shot. Like, they started searching for their remains like over a year after the trash had already been taken. So like, for them to find in a landfill, you can just imagine how much garbage is in a landfill. So that's like, it's not even like a needle in a haystack. It's like a grain of salt in a landfill that you're looking for. What frustrates me is that with the Canadian investigators, they knew so much sooner. And instead of notifying the family members right away, they just held it off and let months pass. So by the time that they did tell them, it was like, there's really not much we can do. We know they're there though. But they had the money for the robot dogs, right? Yeah, I brought that up recently, another one. It's a really touchy subject for me. Anyways, when they told Israel the efforts that they had made to look for Bill and Lorraine and the cost and the manpower that was put into that, he literally laughed and was like, oh wow, that's a lot. I almost feel guilty. What the through talking to him, they realized like he's not really somebody that anybody has studied or encountered before. He doesn't have an MO. He goes after men, women, any age. I mean, besides kids after his daughter was born, any ethnicity. Sometimes he would just abduct them. Sometimes he would take one person. Sometimes he would take two. He was sexually motivated and attracted to both sexes, so there was no like boundaries when it came to his victims, aside from obviously child after his daughter was born. Those were the only murders that he admitted to when talking to investigators. Those were like, I guess, the only names that he was like straight up like, yes, this is what I did. This is how I did it. These were the people. According to his statements to investigators, though, the first time that he had killed somebody was in Naya Bay, and a few months after that, he said that he killed his second and third victim in Washington, but he did not give specific details like he did with Samantha or with Bill and Lorraine. He just said that there was a female and a male, and he killed the female first. Now, Deborah, who I had mentioned, who was the drifter and like quote unquote like ideal victim for him, they believe she was a victim not just because she was a missing person and that he was like in that general location at the time, but her name was found on his laptop. And this was a big deal because he didn't document things on purpose. Like, he didn't even have locations of where all of these kill kits were around the country. Like, no coordinates or anything. Like, he just remembered it, but he had her name on his computer. And so they decided to confront him with this and show him a photo lineup of people. And Deborah's picture was within the lineup. And They said as soon as he saw it, he kind of cracked. And not because it's like, oh, like I recognize her, but it was almost like he was like, oh my God, like I haven't even given you any indication that she was a victim of mine. I'm always like 10 steps ahead of you. Now you're ahead of me. You're showing me something. And he's just like, oh no, like I don't know that woman at all. And they're like, well, really, it's interesting because her name was on your computer. And he just plays it off like I don't know about any names being on my computer. And that is all he says. He doesn't end up confessing. He denies it, but the way that investigators had interpreted it was that they shook him up. Like it was obvious that he was caught and that they knew more than he was giving. Danielle Hallen mentioned this part, and I loved like how, you know, she was just as offended as I was because Danielle's not Canadian. But there was a point in this interview or interrogation where Israel's asked like, okay, you know, you have done like a lot of traveling up from Alaska through Canada into the States. Is there anybody that you killed in Canada, like along your travels? And he says, Canadians don't count. So we don't know if we don't count because, you know, like we are beneath him, or he had killed Canadians and he's like, oh, like those don't count. So like really my kill list is higher. Now, there are a lot of people that believe that Israel was responsible for some of the deaths that are along the Highway of Tears. We've talked about this a little bit before. Those murders, they're ongoing and started in the 70s. So not implying that he's like the one to start murdering and disposing bodies on the Highway of Tears, but it's believed that he contributed to the alarming outstanding number of people that have been found on the highway. There's also, you know, you can tie in his upbringing within the arc of where they believe like any other race other than white is just subhuman, and a lot of those victims on the Highway of Tears are Indigenous. So that adds like a whole other layer to it, which is, it's just infuriating. Like, F off, dude. Now, for the most part, Israel was like I don't even like giving like any form of compliment, but like a cooperative, you know, chill prisoner, until during one of his court appearances, he tries to make an escape attempt. And I don't think it was actually to like escape. It was like to force like an execution on him. He was able to unlock his restraints. And so he took this plastic wrap from a sandwich and made this like little tool to like loosen the lock. Yeah. And then once he did that, he took that end of the handcuff or leg cuff and stuffed it into his sock, and nobody noticed it. And in the middle of court, he like jumps over the rail, and the whole courtroom is filled with U.S. Marshals. And so he gets a couple steps. One of them punches him in the face, but this doesn't even affect him. He doesn't even fall. He actually keeps going on. And then another 3 marshals tackle him to the ground. And this is something that had been said about him, is that he was freakishly strong. He ran a lot. He lifted. He did marathons. He obviously did a lot of manual labor in construction for a living. So after this attempt, he did talk with interrogators about it the next morning, and he just basically said that like, I'm not patient enough for all of this. Like, I just want to go. Like, I just want to get taken out. I want my execution like right now. He was told in a nutshell, like, okay, the more you cooperate, the more victims that you give us, the more likely that is going to happen. And Israel was like, no, I know how this works. Like, this is going to get dragged out in court. This is not going to be like a next Tuesday type of thing. This is going to be in a couple of years. And I will tell you everything, you know, I want my date and I want it soon. It pretty much ends with them agreeing, like knowing like, okay, like, yeah, you do know how this works. And we can't just like snap our fingers and get you a date all of a sudden. And Israel says to them, I know that I've like lost control at this point now. I know that this is just going to be like an ongoing waiting game. You know there's other people. I know there's other people. And I want to just keep that to myself. Like, I did it for me. I don't need the notoriety. I don't want my name in the newspaper. I'm just going to keep those victims and those moments for myself. With that, he stopped talking, and on December 2nd, 2012, at the Anchorage Correctional Complex, Israel Keyes committed suicide. I don't want to go into detail of how he was able to get a weapon and use it. And there was actually a note on, I guess, you know, this will be obvious about what happened, but there was a note, I guess, on his door that said, do not give this man a razor. And then he was still able to get access to one. But this was another thing that he had planned out. He had like collected milk cartons to catch blood to make sure that there wouldn't be any pooling to alert any guards that he was trying to harm himself. And yeah, and you could Google like what he did. Or I don't want to make it like cryptic or whatever, like what a piece of crap. Then he ended up like using a bed sheet to like finish, everything. But he did write a suicide note. It's more like a poem. Victoria reads the whole thing on her channel. So again, go check it out. She has worked so hard on this case. But what makes people strongly believe that, I mean, despite just taking his word for it, that there were more victims, but an actual number, is that after he died, there were drawings that were drawn in his blood under his bed. And it was 12 sheets of paper, and 11 of those, each of them had one skull that was on them. And then on the 12th, there was like a satanic, what's a little, like the devil guy, like Baphomet pentagram on it. And so it's believed that the 11 skulls represent his victims, and then that 12th one represents himself. And I mean, you can go with the obvious, like, oh, this must mean these are the victims, and this is him saying this. But it goes further into it just based on the interaction that investigators had with Israel. And even though he was not, like, he said that he wasn't wanting the notoriety or anything like that and didn't give full confessions, it was almost like he wanted to make sure that nothing was incorrect, because while he was talking to investigators, if they got any details wrong that and said it to him, he quickly corrected them. He was like that, like, oh nope, that didn't happen. It was like this. But those were with things that he had already given. So he was very meticulous. We know that he was like a planner on planner. And so it's like, okay, I don't want the notoriety, but I also don't want you to get it wrong. Like there were 11, that's what this represents, but he didn't want to give like names or anything. So he still was holding on to control. That being said, I mean, there is so much to look into in this case. Like I said, I was not prepared. I'm still like, there is so much more to look into, to consider. I know that now I'm leaving you with kind of like a rabbit hole to enter as well. But you'll see there, like the FBI, they're still wanting help from the public because they want to make sure. And I do respect that. Although there's speculation of some people, they're just like, okay, there's got to be like that one clue that just solidifies that he was the one responsible. In the same sense, it's the likelihood of doing that is, I think that they're very aware that they might not be able to solve every one of them and figure out every one of his victims because of how meticulous he was. It's not going to be one of those cases where it's like, oh yeah, all 11 or more victims, he's left some sort of clue or DNA behind. I mean, there could be a possibility of like some shred of DNA being somewhere, but he was like beyond planner. Like, it's just so eerie because it's like all of those years in the military that you were thinking like, oh, I can't wait to kill someone. Couldn't you have been like, I should go get help. I can't wait to get out of the military so that I can go and talk to somebody about not doing this. Like, you don't want to believe that people are just pure evil. He is like, just thinking of him as the epitome of pure evil. And while you can be like, okay, I'm glad that you were able to give us some information and like insight into your mind, it doesn't make that any less unsettling. It's freaking twisted. So yeah, I don't know. I wish that it could be like a more like closed case closure here, but there isn't. And the FBI, they are still working. This is still ongoing, and it's so upsetting that he is just like so selfish. He even said that in one of his interviews. He's like, I'm somebody who gets bored easy. Like, I'm somebody who's really impatient, but you had the patience to plan all this out, Israel. Anyways, I'm someone who's impatient, and I'm not going to spend the rest of my life like bored in prison. Like, oh, sorry. Maybe you shouldn't have done these things to put yourself in that situation. I don't know. Anyways, that's it for me today. So I know that I'm probably going to leave you guys on a lot of in a rabbit hole, and I apologize for that. But yeah, this is where I've been for quite some time. All right, let's answer the riddle. Okay. All right. quick refresher. The riddle is, I have 4 fingers and a thumb, but I will never be alive. What am I? And the answer is a glove. And if you're wondering if I got it, I did not. Okay, I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly until then. Make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. And Nashville, I leave tomorrow morning and I can't wait to see you this weekend. Okay, bye.